Hi friends and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Akash Chopra. Learn CCNP switch in 20 days and today's topic is DTP day 4. So we'll just be going through what DTP stands for and what are the DTP modes and what is the operation for these two modes, and we'll discuss about this as well, and we'll discuss about the default modes in 3750 and 3550 switches. So 3750 has dynamic auto and 3550 has dynamic desirable by default. So we'll just make a note of this point. So we'll just see how to disable the DTP. We'll discuss on debugging DTP packets, how to enable the DTP debugging for on the switch. So to disable the debugging, we'll use undebug all, and we'll discuss about the native VLAN, and we'll discuss that the tagging is not performed in .1 queue when it comes to native VLAN, and in ISL it will perform tagging. So we'll discuss about inter-VLAN routing as well. So we will configure a router on a stick as SVI will be used in a multi-layer switch. So currently we'll be using router on a stick on this topology. So now let's get started. So DTP stands for Dynamic Trunking Protocol. So it it functions on the trunk link. So this would be the links on which DTP will be negotiating or accepting negotiations. So it will either negotiate or either it will accept negotiations. So based upon those negotiations, they will form trunks links here. So we'll talk about it. So DTP stands for Dynamic Trunking Protocol. It is a Cisco proprietary and it is a layer 2 protocol. It works on the layer 2. So it is used to create trunk ports and access port dynamically. So dynamically, when we say there are two modes of DTP, so by default onto 3750 switches they have dynamic auto and dynamic desirable. So statically we are not asking them to be as trunk. So this is called as dynamically assigning the ports dynamically. So by default DTP is enabled on all the Cisco switches, and it uses multicast MAC address of 0100.0CCC dot tetra C. So this is the multicast MAC address of DTP. It uses this address and it sends message periodically in every 30 seconds. So messages will either be sent as triggered or either they will be sent as periodically. So in TCP it will be sent as triggered because it will be getting acknowledgement for each and every packet, and in a UDP it will not give acknowledgement for every packet, so it will send the packets periodically in every 30 seconds. So like in EIGRP, if you remember from the CCNA studies, so EIGRP also, if there was no acknowledgement during the SRTT time, it used to send 16 unicasts. So those 16 messages were sent periodically. So after getting an acknowledgement for this, it will stop sending the unicasts. So I'm sure you must be familiar about it. That in so periodically, after every 30 seconds, it will send messages, the DTP messages. So the modes of DTP are dynamic auto, which will wait for negotiation, and dynamic desirable, it will initiate the negotiation. Basically it also initiates the negotiation, but for now let's concentrate that it waits for negotiation. So in this example, there are switch 1 and switch 2 connected with each other. So if I say dynamic auto in this side and dynamic desirable here, so the result will be trunking will be formed in between these in on this link, so it will behave as a trunk link. If we have dynamic desirable and dynamic desirable on both the sides, then also trunking will be formed. On if on one side we have dynamic desirable and on the other side we have dynamic auto, so the trunking will form. Only in the case of dynamic auto on both sides, the trunking will not be formed and it would behave as an access port. So these are the port modes. So switch port has two modes now. So it would be administrative mode and operational mode, as we already discussed. So in administrative mode, if we assign a port statically to access, it will say a static access. If we assign a port to trunk statically, it will say a static trunk. And if we assign a port to dynamic auto or dynamic desirable, we'll see that the administrative mode will reflect as dynamic auto and dynamic desirable. However, the operational mode will be either trunk or it will be either access. So this we have already discussed. So noting these 2 points, they can be important points. So 3750 switches have dynamic auto by default and 3550 switches have dynamic desirable by default. Now coming on to switch port no negotiate. So if there is an access port, DTP frames by default are off onto that. So if we want to statically assign a port as trunk, so there is no use of sending these DTP messages, right? So we will use switch port no negotiate command to disable the DTP, as we have statically configured the interface as trunk. So we already discussed that debug DTP packets will show us whether the DTP packet processing is on, and undebug all will disable the DTP debugging or any debugging. So we will statically configure the end user ports with access mode so that the DTP is off. So here you can see that on access modes of switches, so the DTP is off by default. So we'll come across this as well. So now coming on to native VLAN. So the first and the very useful point is that it is used to support the untagged traffic on the trunk link, and it supports only .1q, not ISL. So this is a very important point. So by default on all the switches, VLAN 1 is the native VLAN, and all the DTP, CDP, LLDP messages are sent on the native VLAN only through the trunk port. So they'll exchange the DTP, CDP, and LLDP messages from the native VLAN, and which is on the trunk port. So as no tagging is done, there will be less congestion on the link. So the link will have a less congestion as there will not be any tagging, and as ISL does not supports this, so it will not be used. So at a time only one VLAN can be made as the native VLAN, so we can have only one native VLAN. By default it's VLAN 1. We can change the native VLAN to any other VLAN. So tagging is not performed in .1q, so the frames will not be tagged in .1q encapsulation type. However, in ISL the tagging will be happening. So if this switch wants to communicate to this switch and we configure this port as native VLAN 10 and this port as native VLAN 20, so as ISL will perform tagging here, so the data frame will have a tag of VLAN 10 here and VLAN 20 here, so it will drop the frame onto this switch. However, in .1q there won't be any tagging for the native VLAN, so the communication will happen. For example, if we have a PC connected here and we have a PC connected here, so if we set the native VLAN as 10 onto this port and native VLAN 20 onto this port, so using .1q encapsulation, it won't be tagging it. So the data packet will be on the native VLAN itself. So it won't drop the native VLAN data packet. So it will transmit this to this user. So if this user tries to communicate with this user, so the communication can happen. However, in ISL type, it will be tagging VLAN 10 here and VLAN 20 here, so the communication will not happen. So I'm sure you must have got all these points. So now coming on to inter VLAN routing. So we discussed that we'll be discussing router on a stick. So we'll configure this topology now into EVNG. So I'll go ahead and I'll just create this topology now onto EVNG. So let's move on to EVNG. Now this is the topology, and I will start with turning these nodes on. So now these nodes are on. Let's go on to the switch. We'll check for the VLANs. Yes, we have two VLANs created onto this switch. So we'll assign Ethernet 0/1 onto VLAN 10 and Ethernet 0/2 into VLAN 20, and Ethernet 0/0 will be the trunk port. So we'll go ahead with the configuration, and let's start off with Ethernet 0/0 itself. So interface Ethernet 0/0. As you know that if we say switch port mode trunk, it will reflect as an error, so we have to change the encapsulation type first. So switch port trunk encapsulation .1q, we'll follow the .1q encapsulation here. So interface Ethernet 0/0 switch port trunk encapsulation .1q, and now switch port mode trunk. So we'll say we have statically configured this as trunk. So I'll show you in the administrative mode, it will show as trunk only, static trunk. So now coming on to interface Ethernet 0/1. So we'll say switch port mode access, and switch port will access VLAN 10 on Ethernet 0/1. Now going on to interface Ethernet 0/2, we'll say switch port mode access, and switch port will access VLAN 20 here. So we'll just go out, we'll do show VLAN brief so as to check for the ports. So now the ports are assigned to VLAN 10 and VLAN 20, and we'll check for the show interfaces trunk. So we'll get that Ethernet 0/0 is the trunk interface configured, in which the loud VLANs are 1, 10 and 20. So we'll also see show interfaces Ethernet 0/0 switch port. So here you can see that administrative mode is trunk, as we have statically configured as trunk, and the operational mode is as trunk. So the administrative trunking and encapsulation is .1q, and the operational is also .1q, as we have statically configured. Negotiation of trunking is on, that it means that it is sending the DTP frames currently. So this was the information about all these commands. So access mode VLAN is 1 by default. Trunking native mode VLAN. So the native VLAN is 1 by default here. So now coming on to the PCs, we'll assign the IP addresses to PC1 and PC2. Interface Ethernet 0 slash, we'll check which interface. 0 slash 1 is connected to PC1 and 0 slash 2 is connected to PC2. So 0 slash 1 IP address will be 10.1.1.1. We'll do a no shut here, exit, and we have said no IP routing. Yeah, okay. So show IP interface brief will show us this IP. Similarly, onto the PC2, will disable IP routing, and in the interface Ethernet 0 slash 2 IP address will be 20.1.1.1. And now we can also set the default gateways here itself. So configure T IP default gateway. We can say 10.1.1.10 for this. Now show IP route. If we do, we get that the default gateway is 10.1.1.10 here, and here also we can say IP default gateway 20.1.1.10. So the interface is off currently, so we will go to interface Ethernet 0 slash 2 and we'll do no shut. Now the interface is up. We'll do show IP route. So the gateway is 2110. Now we have configured the PCs and the switches accordingly. So coming on to the router now. In the interface Ethernet 0 slash 0, I'll do no IP address. Now I will configure sub interfaces. Now coming on to this topology, so these sub interfaces would be the interfaces on this interface. So they would be written as .10 and .20. So it would be Ethernet 0 slash 0.10 and Ethernet 0 slash 0.20. So we'll configure the gateway for these as this for on to this .10 sub interface, and the IP address of this onto this .20, so that they will have a gateway. These PCs will have a gateway which would be here onto this sub interface, and on this sub interface we will be enabling the encapsulation type as .1q for the VLANs VLAN 10 and VLAN 20, so that the users can communicate with each other. So when it comes up to so when the frame comes to this .10 interface sub interface, So it will have the encapsulation as .1q for the VLAN 10 users, and onto this .20 the encapsulation will be .1q for VLAN 20 users. So the communication will happen between these two. So let's go on to our topology now, and we'll just configure the sub interfaces. So if I don't say the encapsulation type as .1q here, it won't take the IP addresses onto the sub interfaces. So let me show you that as well. So if we go to interface Ethernet 0/0.10, if I say the IP address now, so it will if I say the IP address as 10.1.1.10. See, it is not taking the IP address, so it is asking me to either allow the encapsulation as .1q or as ISL. So either I need to have .1q or ISL. So in this sub interface, I'll say encapsulation .1q for VLAN 10. So now this would be all for this command, and now we will be able to give IP address 10.1.1.10, no shut, we'll do no shut. Now we'll exit interface ethernet 0/0.20. We'll say encapsulation .1q for VLAN 20, and we'll give the IP address as 20.1.1.10.0. No shut. We'll say exit. So now currently you can see that after doing this, we have set the encapsulation type as .1q for VLANs 10 and VLAN 20 onto these sub interfaces. So the interface is this, and there are one interface configured as .10 and one interface configured as .20. And now coming on to the lab. So we'll do show IP route. Currently we can see that the interface is the gateway of last resort is not set, so we'll check for the interfaces. Most probably interface ethernet 0/0 will be in the down state, so let me check it out. So show IP interface brief. So you can see that ethernet 0/0 is down, so we'll go to that interface, we'll do as no shut, and then the communication can happen. You will see configure T interface ethernet 0/0 will do no shut. Simply we'll do exit from here. We'll check the IP routing information. So we'll see that this 10.1.1.10 and 20.1.1.10 is directly connected to Ethernet 0/20 and 10. So we'll check uh, onto this PC. So we'll ping 20.1.1.1, and now the communication will happen. You will be seeing. So you can see that the communication can happen between the inter-VLAN users. So this method was called as router on a stick method between inter-VLAN communication. So this would be all for today's session. I hope this session would have been useful for you. So in the upcoming session, I will be discussing on BTP. So if you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so. Please hit the bell icon. Please support me. Please stay safe and eat healthy. Have a great day.